Once there was a small city built upon ordinary muddy hills. No one knew that one day it would rule 3 continents and change the fate of millions. That city was Rome. Here, men became emperors and were declared gods. Slaves entered the arena and became legends, while love, betrayal, war, and glory walked the same streets. For centuries, Rome did not just rule the world, it shaped people's dreams, fears, and future. From a baby protected by a she-wolf to eagles falling from the sky, this is the unforgettable story of the most magnificent empire humanity has ever known. The She-Wolf and the Brothers. In the year 753 BC, on the banks of the Tiber River, twin brothers abandoned as infants and nursed by a she-wolf stood ready to found a city that would shake the world. Romulus and Remus, descendants of the Trojan hero Aeneas, had survived impossible odds. Raised by shepherds after their miraculous rescue, they had grown into strong young men with divine ambitions. The Palatine Hill, one of 7 hills overlooking the river's bend, became the site of their grand vision. But brotherhood would not survive ambition. When Remus mockingly leaped over Romulus's newly drawn boundaries, his brother struck him down in rage. With his twin's body still warm on the ground, Romulus proclaimed himself king of a city that bore his name, Roma. The first Romans were outcasts, fugitives, and adventurers, men without women, without legitimacy, without a future. Romulus devised a cunning plan: invite the neighboring Sabines to a festival, then abduct their daughters. The rape of the Sabines became Rome's founding crime, a violent beginning that would set the pattern for centuries of conquest. Yet the Sabine women, led by Hersilia, brokered peace between their fathers and new husbands, creating Rome's first political alliance through matrimony. The city grew with astonishing speed, absorbing surrounding villages, establishing the Senate of Elders, and creating the patron-client system that would define Roman society. Romulus ruled for 37 years before mysteriously vanishing during a thunderstorm, ascending, so the priests claimed, to become the god Quirinus. Rome's foundation myth established its core values: strength, cunning, assimilation, and the belief that destiny itself favored this city of 7 hills. The she-wolf's children would devour the world. The 7 Kings and the Republic's birth. After Romulus came 6 more kings, each adding layers to Rome's emerging identity. Numa Pompilius, the philosopher king, brought religion and calendar reform, establishing the priesthoods and temples that would sanctify Roman power. Tullus Hostilius proved Rome's military might by destroying Alba Longa, while Ancus Marcius extended Roman territory to the sea and built the first bridge across the Tiber. Then came the Etruscan dynasty. Tarquinius Priscus, an ambitious immigrant from Etruria, seized the throne and transformed Rome from a collection of villages into a true city. He drained the swampy valley between the hills, creating the Forum Romanum, the heart of Roman public life. His successor, Servius Tullius, built the massive defensive walls and reorganized society into classes based on wealth rather than birth alone, planting seeds of social mobility. But the last king, Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquine the Proud, embodied tyranny itself. His reign of terror, marked by arbitrary executions and the confiscation of property, culminated in an unforgivable crime. In 509 BC, his son Sextus Tarquinius assaulted Lucretia, the virtuous wife of a Roman nobleman. Rather than live with dishonor, Lucretia gathered her family, told them what had transpired, and took her own life. Her final words ignited revolution. Led by Lucius Junius Brutus and Lucius Tarquinius Collatinus, the Romans rose up, expelled the Tarquine family forever, and swore a sacred oath: never again would Rome bow to a king. They established the Republic, Res Publica, the public thing, governed by 2 consuls elected annually, checked by the Senate, and accountable to the people. The Roman Republic was born in a woman's sacrifice and a people's rage against tyranny. It would endure for nearly 5 centuries, conquering the known world while constantly balancing liberty and order, ambition and law. The struggle of the orders. The Republic's first 2 centuries witnessed an internal revolution as profound as any foreign conquest. Rome's society divided sharply between patricians, the aristocratic families who monopolized political power, and plebeians, the common citizens who formed the backbone of Rome's. Armies yet possessed no voice in government. The patricians controlled the consulship, the senate, and the priesthoods. They alone knew the laws, which remained unwritten and subject to aristocratic interpretation. The plebeians farmed the land, fought the wars, and paid the taxes. Yet, they could not marry patricians, hold high office, or appeal unjust legal decisions. In 494 BC, pushed beyond endurance by debt slavery and political exclusion, the plebeians made a revolutionary move. They seceded. The entire plebeian population abandoned Rome, withdrawing to the Sacred Mount outside the city. Without farmers, soldiers, and craftsmen, Rome faced collapse. The patricians had no choice but to negotiate. The plebeians won the right to elect their own officials, the tribunes of the plebs, who possessed sacrosanct status and the power to veto any government action. It was the first of many victories. Over the following centuries, through persistent pressure and occasional threats of renewed secession, the plebeians gradually dismantled patrician privilege. In 451 BC, the 12 Tables codified Roman law in bronze, making justice visible and consistent. In 367 BC, the Licinian Sextian laws opened the consulship to plebeians. By 287 BC, the Hortensian law made plebiscites binding on all Romans, effectively granting the plebeian assembly legislative supremacy. This struggle of the orders transformed Rome from an aristocratic oligarchy into something unprecedented, a mixed constitution combining monarchical elements in the magistrates, aristocratic elements in the Senate, and democratic elements in the assemblies. This balance of power, this constant negotiation between classes, gave Rome internal strength and flexibility. The city that learned to compromise at home would prove unstoppable abroad. The conquest of Italy. While resolving internal conflicts, Rome simultaneously fought for survival against hostile neighbors. The young republic faced enemies on all sides: Etruscans to the north, Sabines and Aequi to the east, Volsci to the south. Each spring brought new campaigns, each generation new wars. In 390 BC, disaster struck. A Gallic army under Brennus swept down from the north, shattered the Roman army at the Allia River, and sacked Rome itself. The Gauls looted the city for months, while the last defenders held out on the Capitoline Hill. When the Romans finally bought off the invaders with gold, Brennus contemptuously threw his sword onto the scales, declaring Vae Victis, woe to the vanquished. Rome would never forget this humiliation. The city rebuilt with massive new walls and an iron determination never again to suffer such disgrace. Rome's military system evolved into something extraordinary. Unlike Greek city-states that relied on militias, Rome created a citizen army of unprecedented discipline and flexibility. The legion, organized into maniples that could operate independently, proved superior to the rigid Greek phalanx. Every Roman citizen owed military service. Every soldier received a share of conquered land. War became Rome's engine of expansion and social mobility. The Latin League, once Rome's equals, became subordinates. The Samnites, fierce mountain warriors, fought 3 brutal wars spanning 50 years before submitting. The Greek cities of southern Italy, including the magnificent Tarentum, fell one by one. When Tarentum hired Pyrrhus of Epirus, one of antiquity's greatest generals, he won battles but could not win the war. His costly victories gave history the term Pyrrhic victory. By 264 BC, Rome controlled the entire Italian peninsula. But Roman conquest differed from typical ancient imperialism. Rather than simply extracting tribute, Rome bound Italy together through a brilliant system of alliances, colonies, and gradual extension of citizenship. Former enemies became partners in future conquests. The Romans had created not just an empire, but a commonwealth. Carthage and the First Punic War. In 264 BC, Rome made a fateful decision that would transform it from a land power into a Mediterranean superpower. The city of Messana in Sicily requested Roman protection against Carthage, the wealthy Phoenician trading empire that dominated the western Mediterranean. Rome, having never fought a naval war, accepted the challenge. Carthage was everything Rome was not: ancient, sophisticated, fabulously wealthy, and mistress of the seas. Its navy had ruled Mediterranean waters for centuries. Its merchant fleets brought African grain, Spanish silver, and exotic goods from beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Its citizens hired mercenary armies rather than fight themselves. The Carthaginians viewed the Romans as crude Italian farmers playing at empire. They would learn otherwise. The First Punic War lasted 23 years and cost hundreds of thousands of lives. Rome, lacking a navy, simply built one, copying a captured Carthaginian ship and constructing a fleet of 120 vessels in 60 days. Roman engineers invented the corvus, a boarding bridge that turned naval battles into land battles, negating Carthaginian sailing superiority. The war seesawed across Sicily and North Africa. Rome won spectacular naval victories at Mylae and Ecnomus, then suffered catastrophic defeats when storms destroyed entire fleets. The Romans lost over 700 ships during the war and kept building more. In 241 BC, a final naval victory at the Aegates Islands forced Carthage to surrender Sicily. For the first time, Rome possessed overseas territory. Sicily became Rome's first provincia, a province governed by a Roman magistrate. The Republic had stumbled into empire. The victory came at tremendous cost. Perhaps 100,000 Romans perished. The treasury was emptied, and countless families mourned lost sons. But Rome had learned it could defeat any enemy through sheer determination and willingness to absorb losses that would break other nations. Carthage, meanwhile, nursed its humiliation and plotted revenge. Hannibal's revenge. In 218 BC, a 29-year-old Carthaginian general named Hannibal Barca embarked on one of history's most audacious military campaigns. Having sworn as a child to forever hate Rome, Hannibal led an army of 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants from Spain through southern Gaul and over the Alps into Italy. The mountain crossing was a nightmare. Rock slides, hostile tribes, freezing temperatures, and treacherous paths claimed half his army and most of his elephants. But Hannibal emerged in northern Italy with a hardened force and an unshakable will. For the next 15 years, Hannibal ravaged Italy, winning victory after impossible victory. At the Trebia River, he lured a Roman army into an ambush. At Lake Trasimene, he destroyed another Roman force in history's largest ambush, slaughtering 15,000 in a morning. But his masterpiece came in 216 BC at Cannae. Facing a Roman army of 80,000, the largest force Rome had ever assembled, Hannibal commanded just 50,000 men. Through brilliant tactics, he allowed the Romans to push back his center while his cavalry enveloped their flanks. The Romans found themselves surrounded, packed so tightly they could barely raise their weapons. By day's end, 50,000 Romans lay slain, including 80 senators and both consuls. Cannae remains the most studied battle in military history, the perfect example of a tactical double envelopment. Rome should have surrendered. Any other nation would have. But Rome refused. The Senate forbade even speaking of peace. They raised new armies, avoided pitched battles, and slowly, methodically, wore Hannibal down. They struck at Carthaginian allies, recaptured cities, and cut supply lines. Hannibal roamed Italy like a caged lion, winning battles, but unable to win the war. Rome's secret weapon was not military genius, but political resilience. The Italian allies, despite Hannibal's presence, mostly remained loyal. The Roman system of incorporation had created bonds stronger than fear. Scipio and Carthage's fall. While Hannibal remained undefeated in Italy, a young Roman general named Publius Cornelius Scipio conceived a daring strategy: take the war. To Africa. Scipio was only 25 when his father and uncle perished fighting in Spain. Given command despite his youth, he captured the Carthaginian capital of New Carthage in Spain through a surprise attack, then systematically conquered Carthaginian Iberia. But Spain was merely preparation. In 204 B, Scipio landed in North Africa with an army that had studied Hannibal's tactics. He formed an alliance with Masinissa, a Numidian prince whose cavalry matched Carthage's finest. Scipio's army ravaged the African countryside, threatening Carthage itself. The Carthaginian Senate had no choice. Recall Hannibal from Italy. After 15 years of undefeated campaigning, Hannibal sailed home to defend his city. The two greatest generals of the age met at Zama in 202 BCE. Before battle, they spoke privately, warrior to warrior, genius to genius. Hannibal reportedly proposed peace, but Scipio's terms were too harsh. The battle would decide everything. Hannibal deployed his war elephants first, but Scipio's troops opened lanes, letting the beasts charge through harmlessly. When Hannibal's mercenary infantry attacked, Scipio's veterans held firm. The decisive moment came when Masiniss's Numidian cavalry, having driven off Hannibal's horsemen, returned to strike the Carthaginian rear. Hannibal's army collapsed. For the first time in his career, the great general tasted defeat. Carthage surrendered unconditionally. The peace terms were crushing. Surrender all but 10 warships, pay massive indemnity, wage no wars without Roman permission. Carthage, once Rome's equal, became a client state. Scipio returned to Rome with the cognomen Africanus, conqueror of Africa. He had achieved what no Roman before him had, defeated Hannibal and saved the Republic. But the Second Punic War had transformed Rome. The Republic had become the Mediterranean's dominant power, and its citizens had learned they were destined to rule. The Greek conquest. With Carthage humbled, Rome turned eastward to the wealthy, sophisticated kingdoms that had emerged from Alexander the Great's empire. The Hellenistic East viewed Rome as a crude Western power, rich in soldiers but poor in culture. The Romans, sensitive to such condescension, would prove their supremacy in both war and diplomacy. The first target was Philip V of Macedon, who had allied with Hannibal during Rome's darkest hour. In 1197 BC, at Cynocephaly, Roman legions shattered the Macedonian phalanx, proving that Roman tactical flexibility surpassed Greek rigid formations. Philip became Rome's subordinate. Next came Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire, who controlled vast territories from Asia Minor to Persia. Antiochus foolishly harbored Hannibal and challenged Rome's authority. At Magnesia in 190 BC, Roman legions and their allies crushed Antiochus's massive army. The great king surrendered Asia Minor and paid crushing indemnities. Hannibal, now a fugitive, eventually took poison rather than be captured by Rome. But Rome's relationship with Greece itself proved complex. The Romans admired Greek culture, philosophy, and art even as they conquered Greek cities. In 168 BC, at Pydna, Rome utterly destroyed the Macedonian kingdom, ending the dynasty that had once conquered the known world. The Roman general Aemilius Paulus wept at the sight of Macedonia's last king in chains, moved by the reversals of fortune. Yet when Corinth led a Greek rebellion in 146 BC, Rome's response was merciless. The city was razed, its population enslaved, its treasures shipped to Rome. The same year, Rome finally destroyed Carthage in the Third Punic War, plowing salt into its ruins. Two ancient civilizations ended in the same year, both victims of Roman power. The Mediterranean had become a Roman lake, Mare Nostrum, our sea. Greek tutors now educated Roman children, Greek statues adorned Roman homes, and Greek philosophy shaped Roman thought. Rome had conquered Greece militarily, but Greece conquered Rome culturally. The Brothers Gracchi. Rome's conquests brought unprecedented wealth and equally unprecedented problems. By the mid-2nd century BC, Italian farmland was consolidating into massive estates worked by enslaved war captives, while the small farmers who had built Rome's legions were dispossessed and impoverished. The Republic's social fabric was tearing. In 133 BC, Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus, a tribune from Rome's most distinguished family, proposed revolutionary legislation, redistribute public land to landless citizens, limiting how much any individual could possess. The proposal threatened the senatorial aristocracy's wealth and power. When Tiberius sought an unprecedented second tribunate to protect his reforms, the senators acted. Led by his own cousin, a mob of senators and their clients murdered Tiberius and 300 of his supporters, throwing their bodies into the Tiber. It was the first political violence in Rome since the Republic's founding. 10 years later, Tiberius's younger brother Gaius Gracchus became tribune and pursued an even more ambitious program: subsidized grain for the urban poor, extension of citizenship to Italian allies, and curbing senatorial judicial corruption. Gaius proved a more skilled politician than his brother, building coalitions and outmaneuvering opponents. But in 121 BC, the Senate passed the ultimate decree, declaring a state of emergency and authorizing the consuls to use any means necessary. Gaius and thousands of his supporters perished in the violence that followed. The brothers Gracchi failed in their immediate goals, but succeeded in something more significant. They revealed that the Republic's political system could no longer peacefully resolve social conflicts. They showed that appeals to the people could challenge senatorial authority. And they demonstrated that violence, once introduced into politics, would not easily depart. The century that followed would see the Republic tear itself apart as ambitious generals, popular demagogues, and reactionary senators fought for supremacy. The Gracchi had opened Pandora's box. Marius and Sulla. Gaius Marius was a new man, novus homo, the first in his family to reach the consulship. A military genius from a provincial Italian family, Marius rose through talent rather than birth. In 107 BC, facing a crisis in North Africa, he revolutionized the Roman army by recruiting landless citizens, previously excluded from service. These soldiers owed loyalty not to the Republic, but to the general who paid them and promised them land. Marius's new model army crushed Rome's enemies, Jugurtha in Africa, and then, in spectacular campaigns from 102 to 101 BC, the Germanic tribes of the Cimbri and Teutones who threatened Italy itself. Marius was elected consul an unprecedented 7 times, shattering all constitutional precedent. But Marius's rival, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, an aristocrat of ancient lineage, proved equally ruthless. When both men claimed command against Mithridates of Pontus in 88 BC, Sulla did the unthinkable. He marched his legions on Rome itself. For the first time, Roman soldiers attacked their own city. Marius fled, and Sulla departed for the east. But Marius returned, seized Rome, and massacred Sulla's supporters. When Marius died in 86 BC, his faction continued ruling Rome. Then, in 83 BC, Sulla returned from the east with a veteran army and a list of enemies. He introduced prescriptions, public lists of those condemned without trial, their property confiscated, their lives forfeit. Thousands died, including 40 senators and 1,600 equestrians. Sulla's soldiers hunted victims through Rome's streets. The young Julius Caesar, related by marriage to Marius, barely escaped. Sulla proclaimed himself dictator and reformed the constitution to strengthen the Senate and weaken popular tribunes. Then, astonishingly, he retired to his estates in 79 BC, dying a year later. But Sulla's legacy was poison. He had shown that military force could trump political authority, that prescriptions could eliminate enemies, and that dictatorship could solve crises. Future generals would remember these lessons. 11. Pompey the Great. Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, was Sulla's proch, a military prodigy who commanded armies before legally eligible for office. By age 25, he had defeated Marian forces in Sicily and Africa, earning a triumph despite holding no official position. The Senate, desperate for competent generals, repeatedly bent rules for Pompey. In 70 BC, he and Marcus Licinius Crassus, Rome's richest man, became consuls and dismantled Sulla's constitutional reforms, restoring tribunician power. Pompey then received extraordinary commands that made him master of the Mediterranean. First, in 67 BC, he cleared the seas of pirates in just 3 months through brilliant organization and overwhelming force. Then, he took command against Mithridates of Pontus, the Eastern king who had massacred 80,000 Romans and Italians in a single day. Pompey didn't just defeat Mithridates, he reorganized the entire East. He created new provinces, established client kingdoms, and settled his veterans in colonies. He doubled Rome's annual revenue and sent back treasures beyond imagination. When Pompey returned to Italy in 62 BC, many feared he would march on Rome as Sulla had. Instead, he dismissed his legions and entered Rome as a private citizen, expecting the Senate to ratify his eastern settlements and provide land for his veterans. The Senate, dominated by conservatives who feared Pompey's power, refused. Pompey had conquered the East, but could not navigate the Senate. His frustration made him receptive to an alliance proposed by 2 ambitious men, Marcus Licinius Crassus, who sought military glory to match his wealth, and Gaius Julius Caesar, a charismatic aristocrat drowning in debt but rich in ambition. In 60 BC, these 3 formed a private agreement, later called the First Triumvirate, to dominate Roman politics. They would use their combined influence to achieve what the Senate denied them individually. The Republic's informal constitution, based on custom and senatorial consensus, could not contain such concentrated ambition. The triumvirate was not a legal institution, but a conspiracy of power. 12. Caesar's Gallic Wars. In 58 BC, Julius Caesar became governor of Gaul with 4 legions and a burning need for military glory and wealth to match Pompey's. Over the next 9 years, Caesar conquered all of Gaul, modern France, Belgium, and parts of Germany and Switzerland, in campaigns of breathtaking audacity and calculated brutality. Caesar was a new type of Roman commander, brilliant strategist, inspiring leader, and masterful propagandist who sent detailed reports of his campaigns, the commentaries on the Gallic War, to Rome, ensuring his deeds became legendary. He fought the Helvetii, the Germanic tribes, and the fierce Belgae. He built a bridge across the Rhine in 10 days, simply to demonstrate Roman engineering prowess. Then dismantled it. He invaded Britain twice, though without permanent conquest. The Gallic tribes, divided and quarreling, fell one by one to Roman discipline and Caesar's genius. But in 52 BC, a young Gallic chieftain named Vercingetorix united the tribes in a desperate rebellion. He employed scorched earth tactics, denying Caesar supplies while harassing his legions. At Gergovia, Vercingetorix defeated Caesar, one of the Roman general's rare losses. The Gauls retreated to the fortress of Alesia, and Caesar besieged them. When a massive Gallic relief army arrived, Caesar found himself trapped between two armies. His response was audacious. He built two walls, one facing inward to contain Vercingetorix, another facing outward to defend against the relief force. For weeks, the Romans fought on two fronts against overwhelming numbers. At the critical moment, Caesar personally led his cavalry in a charge that shattered the relief army. Vercingetorix surrendered to save his people. Caesar's conquest of Gaul added territory the size of Italy to Rome's empire, enslaved perhaps 1 million people, and made Caesar fabulously wealthy. His legions were now veteran, loyal, and devoted to their commander. More importantly, Caesar had become Pompey's equal in military prestige. The triumvirate's balance of power was broken, and Rome would pay the price. The die is cast. The triumvirate dissolved in rivalry and tragedy. In 53 BC, Crassus, seeking military glory, invaded Parthia and was annihilated at Carrhae, his head used as a prop in a Parthian theatrical performance. His death left only Caesar and Pompey, former allies now rivals. Pompey, jealous of Caesar's growing fame and alarmed by his power, drifted toward the conservative senators who saw Caesar as a threat to the Republic. As Caesar's Gallic command neared its end, the Senate demanded he disband his legions and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar knew this meant prosecution, exile, or worse. He proposed compromise. He would surrender his command if Pompey did likewise. The Senate, manipulated by Caesar's enemy Cato the Younger, refused. In January 49 BC, the Senate passed the ultimate decree, effectively declaring Caesar an enemy of the state. Caesar faced an impossible choice: submit to his enemies or commit treason. On January 10, at the Rubicon River marking the boundary between Gaul and Italy, Caesar hesitated. Crossing with his army meant civil war. Suetonius records that Caesar quoted a Greek playwright, Alea iacta est, the die is cast. Caesar crossed with a single legion. Pompey and the senators, unprepared for Caesar's speed, fled Rome. Caesar marched through Italy, meeting little resistance. Citizens expected another Sulla, but Caesar showed clemency, pardoning enemies and respecting property. In Spain, he defeated Pompey's legates. In 48 BC, Caesar pursued Pompey to Greece. At Pharsalus, despite being outnumbered, Caesar's veterans shattered Pompey's larger but less experienced army. Pompey fled to Egypt, seeking refuge, but the young pharaoh Ptolemy Sateth, hoping to win Caesar's favor, murdered Pompey and sent his head to Caesar. Caesar reportedly wept at the sight. Whether from genuine grief or political theater, none could say. The Republic's greatest general had been murdered by a foreign boy king. Caesar, now 52, was master of Rome, but not yet master of the Roman world. Caesar in Egypt. Caesar arrived in Egypt pursuing Pompey, only to receive his rival's severed head. Egypt, ruled by the teenage pharaoh Ptolemy Sateth and his older sister wife Cleopatra VII, was embroiled in civil war. Cleopatra had been driven from Alexandria by her brother's advisors. She needed a powerful ally. Caesar needed Egyptian grain and wealth. Legend says Cleopatra had herself smuggled into Caesar's presence, rolled in a carpet. Whether true or not, the 21-year-old queen captivated the 52-year-old conqueror. Cleopatra was no mere beauty. She was educated, spoke 9 languages, and understood power. Caesar sided with her against Ptolemy, igniting the Alexandrian War. Caesar's small force found itself besieged in Alexandria's palace quarter. In the fighting, flames spread to the city's legendary library, destroying countless ancient texts. Ptolemy's forces controlled the city, but Caesar held the palace and the queen. When reinforcements finally arrived, Caesar defeated Ptolemy's army. The young pharaoh drowned in the Nile, weighed down by his golden armor. Cleopatra became sole ruler, with her younger brother Ptolemy Sateth as nominal co-regent. Caesar remained in Egypt for months, reportedly sailing up the Nile with Cleopatra in royal splendor. She bore him a son, Caesarion, Little Caesar, whom Caesar never officially acknowledged but never denied. From Egypt, Caesar moved with characteristic speed. Pharnaces of Pontus had seized Roman territory in Asia Minor. Caesar marched north, met Pharnaces at Zela, and destroyed his army in a single 4-hour battle. His report to the Senate was famously terse. Veni, vidi, vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. Returning to Rome in 46 BC, Caesar celebrated 4 triumphs in a single month, displaying the wealth of conquered nations. He reformed the calendar, creating the Julian calendar that, with minor modifications, we still use. He planned massive public works, extended citizenship, and settled veterans in colonies. But he also accepted unprecedented honors, permanent dictatorship, divine honors, and a month named in his honor, Julius, our July. He was becoming something Romans had sworn never to tolerate, a king in all but name. The 15, the Ides of March. By 44 BC, Caesar dominated Rome completely. He held the dictatorship perpetually, controlled all military appointments, and was planning campaigns against Parthia and Dacia. Statues of Caesar appeared throughout Rome, some depicting him with divine attributes. Rumor spread that he would move the capital to Alexandria and make Cleopatra, now visiting Rome with Caesarion, his queen. To traditionalists, Caesar was destroying the Republic. A conspiracy formed around Marcus Junius Brutus, whom Caesar loved like a son, and Gaius Cassius Longinus, a capable general Caesar had pardoned after Pharsalus. The conspirators called themselves liberators, claiming they would restore the Republic by removing the tyrant. They planned to strike on the Ides of March, March 15, when Caesar would attend a Senate meeting. Caesar's wife Calpurnia, disturbed by nightmares, begged him not to go. Soothsayers warned him to beware the Ides of March. But Caesar, perhaps weary of constant vigilance, perhaps believing himself invincible, dismissed his bodyguards and attended the Senate meeting at the theater of Pompey. As Caesar took his seat, the conspirators surrounded him under pretense of petitioning. Tullius Cimber grabbed his toga, the signal to strike. Casca struck first, his dagger glancing off Caesar's shoulder. Then they all attacked. 23 senators stabbing the man who had conquered Gaul, defeated Pompey, and made himself master of Rome. Ancient sources claim Caesar fought back until he saw Brutus among the attackers. Et tu, Bruti? Even you, Brutus? Shakespeare would later write, though Caesar's actual last words, if any, are unknown. He pulled his toga over his head and died at the base of Pompey's statue, pierced by 23 wounds. The liberators expected grateful citizens to celebrate the restoration of liberty. Instead, Rome erupted in fury. Caesar had been popular with the common people, who saw him as their champion against the aristocracy. The conspirators had murdered Caesar, but they could not murder what he represented. The Republic's constitutional system was broken beyond repair. The Second Triumvirate. The liberators had no plan beyond removing Caesar. Marcus Antonius, Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant and co-consul, seized the initiative. At Caesar's funeral, Antony delivered a masterful oration, displaying Caesar's bloody toga and reading his will, which left gardens to the people and money to every citizen. The crowd rioted, hunting down conspirators and burning their houses. Brutus and Cassius fled Rome. But a new player emerged, Gaius Octavius, Caesar's 18-year-old great-nephew, and, according to Caesar's will, his adopted son and heir. The boy who now called himself Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, Octavian, arrived in Rome to claim his inheritance. Antony dismissed him as a child trading on Caesar's name. Octavian proved far more dangerous. He raised a private army from Caesar's veterans, allied with the Senate against Antony then, when the Senate tried to discard him, switched sides. In 43 BC, Octavian, Antony, and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus formed the Second Triumvirate. Unlike the first, this was a legal magistracy with dictatorial powers. Their first act was a prescription that made Sollas look merciful. 300 senators and 2,000 equestrians were condemned, their property confiscated to fund armies. Among the victims was Cicero, Rome's greatest orator, who had foolishly believed he could manipulate Octavian. Antony's soldiers caught the elderly statesman fleeing by litter. Cicero faced his killers with dignity, extending his neck for the blade. His head and hands were displayed on the rostra where he had delivered his greatest speeches. In 42 BC, the triumvirs crossed to Greece and faced Brutus and Cassius at Philippi. In 2 battles, the liberators were defeated. Brutus and Cassius both took their own lives, the last defenders of the Republic dying on foreign soil. The triumvirs divided the Roman world. Octavian took the west, Antony the east, and Lepidus received Africa. But 3 men cannot share supreme power indefinitely. The question was not whether they would fight, but when. Claim 17. Antony and Cleopatra. Mark Antony, ruling the east from Athens, summoned Cleopatra to answer charges that she had aided Cassius. The Queen of Egypt arrived in spectacular fashion, sailing up the Cydnus River in a golden barge, dressed as Venus, surrounded by attendants costumed as Cupids. Antony, styling himself as the new Dionysus, was captivated. Their relationship became one of history's most famous romances and political partnerships. Cleopatra was no mere seductress. She was a shrewd ruler who needed Roman protection for Egypt, while Antony needed Egyptian wealth for his campaigns. Together, they ruled the eastern Mediterranean in pharaonic splendor, holding court in Alexandria. Antony married Cleopatra in an Egyptian ceremony, though he was already married to Octavian's sister, Octavia, in Rome. He declared Cleopatra's son Caesarion as Caesar's true heir and distributed Roman territories to his children by Cleopatra, proclaiming them rulers of various eastern kingdoms. Antony's behavior outraged Rome. Octavian, meanwhile, consolidated power in the west with ruthless efficiency. He eliminated Lepidus, defeated Sextus Pompey, who controlled Sicily, and carefully cultivated his image as the defender of traditional Roman values against Eastern decadence. Octavian's propaganda machine portrayed Antony as bewitched by a foreign queen, abandoning Rome for Alexandria's luxury. In 32 BC, Octavian obtained Antony's will, possibly forged, which supposedly confirmed Antony's grants to Cleopatra's children and requested burial in Alexandria rather than Rome. The Senate, manipulated by Octavian, stripped Antony of his powers and declared war, not on Antony, but on Cleopatra, framing the conflict as Rome versus Egypt rather than civil. War. In 31 BC, the fleets met at Actium on the western coast of Greece. Antony and Cleopatra commanded a larger fleet, but their crews were inexperienced and diseased. Octavian's Admiral Agrippa was a naval genius. The battle turned into a stalemate until Cleopatra's squadron suddenly broke through and fled. Antony, seeing her departure, abandoned his fleet and followed. His remaining ships surrendered. Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Alexandria, knowing the end approached. The first emperor. Octavian pursued the lovers to Egypt methodically, giving them no chance to rebuild their forces. In July 30 BC, his legions surrounded Alexandria. Antony, receiving false news that Cleopatra had taken her own life, fell on his sword. Mortally wounded, he learned Cleopatra lived and was carried to her mausoleum, dying in her arms. Cleopatra attempted to negotiate with Octavian, but the victor had no intention of allowing her to charm another Roman leader. Realizing she would be paraded through Rome in Octavian's triumph, Cleopatra chose her own death. Ancient sources claim she used an asp's venom, though modern historians debate the method. She died dressed in royal regalia, determined to die a queen. Octavian ordered Caesarion, Caesar's son and potential rival, executed. Cleopatra's other children were spared and raised in Rome. Egypt, the last Hellenistic kingdom, became a Roman province, Octavian's personal property. The civil wars that had ravaged Rome for a century were finally over. Octavian returned to Rome in 29 BC as undisputed master of the Roman world. But he had learned from Caesar's fate. Rather than openly claiming kingship, Octavian carefully dismantled the republic while pretending to restore it. In 27 BC, he theatrically offered to surrender all powers to the Senate. The Senate, filled with his supporters, refused and granted him new titles and authorities. He became Augustus, the revered one, and Princeps, first citizen. He held the powers of consul, tribune, and commander without holding the offices permanently. He controlled the armies, the provinces, and the treasury while maintaining the fiction that the Senate still governed. It was a constitutional masterpiece, monarchy disguised as republic. Augustus ruled for 41 years, bringing unprecedented peace and prosperity, the Pax Romana. He reformed the army, created the Praetorian Guard, established the imperial postal system, and beautified Rome with marble monuments. He found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. The Republic was dead, but few mourned it. The empire had begun. 19. The height of empire. The 2 centuries following Augustus witnessed Rome's greatest territorial extent and cultural achievement. The Julio-Claudian dynasty, Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero, ranged from competent to catastrophic. But the imperial system survived even bad emperors. The Flavian dynasty, Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian, brought stability and built the Colosseum, Rome's most iconic monument. But Rome's zenith came under the 5 good emperors, Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, who ruled from 96 to 180 C. Each adopted his successor based on merit rather than birth, ensuring capable leadership. Trajan, Rome's first provincial emperor from Spain, expanded the empire to its greatest extent, conquering Dacia and briefly Mesopotamia. His column in Rome depicts his victories in spiraling relief. Hadrian, his successor, consolidated rather than expanded, building walls across Britain and Germania to mark Rome's boundaries. He traveled constantly, visiting every province, and was the most cultured emperor since Augustus. Antoninus Pius ruled peacefully for 23 years, the empire so stable that his reign seems almost boring in retrospect, the highest compliment to any ruler. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, wrote his meditations while campaigning on the Danube, combining Stoic philosophy with imperial duty. The empire at its height encompassed the entire Mediterranean, stretching from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Syria. 50 to 70 million people lived under Roman rule, connected by 50,000 miles of roads. Roman citizenship gradually extended to more inhabitants, culminating in 212 C, when Caracalla granted citizenship to all free inhabitants. Latin and Greek served as universal languages. Roman law provided unprecedented legal protection. Aqueducts brought water to cities, amphitheaters provided entertainment, and bathhouses offered public luxury. Trade routes connected Rome to India and China. It was humanity's first truly global civilization. But beneath the prosperity, problems festered: the army's growing political power, economic inequality, the difficulty of defending vast frontiers, and the challenge of succession. Marcus Aurelius broke the adoptive succession by naming his incompetent son Commodus as heir. The good times were ending. The fall of Rome. Rome's decline was not a sudden collapse, but a long, complex process spanning centuries. The crisis of the 3rd century saw 50 emperors in 50 years, most dying violently. Plague, invasion, and economic collapse nearly destroyed the empire. Diocletian stabilized the situation by dividing the empire into 4 administrative regions, the Tetrarchy, and imposing rigid economic controls. Constantine reunified the empire, legalized Christianity, and founded Constantinople as a new capital, shifting Rome's center of gravity eastward. The empire split permanently in 395 C into western and eastern halves. The Western Empire, centered on Rome, faced relentless pressure from Germanic tribes, Visigoths, Vandals, Franks, Burgundians, not primitive barbarians, but sophisticated peoples, seeking land and Roman citizenship. In 410 C, Visigoth king Alaric sacked Rome, the first foreign army to do so in 8 centuries. The shock reverberated throughout the empire. Saint Augustine wrote The City of God in response, arguing that earthly kingdoms inevitably fall while God's kingdom endures. The Western emperors became puppets of Germanic generals. In 476 C, the Germanic general Odoacer deposed the last Western emperor, the ironically named Romulus Augustulus, Little Augustus. Odoacer sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, declaring the West no longer needed its own emperor. The date 476 C traditionally marks the fall of the Western Roman Empire, though contemporaries barely noticed. The Eastern Roman Empire, what we call the Byzantine Empire, continued for another 1,000 years, preserving Roman law, Greek culture, and Christian theology until Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453. Rome's fall resulted from numerous factors: economic exhaustion, military pressure, political instability, religious transformation, and the simple difficulty of maintaining such a vast empire. But Rome never truly fell. Its language evolved into Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. Its law forms the basis of most European legal systems. Its architecture inspired Renaissance and neoclassical styles. Its literature, from Virgil to Tacitus, remains foundational to Western culture. The Catholic Church preserved its administrative structure. The very concept of Europe as a unified civilization stems from Rome. From 7 hills beside the Tiber, Rome conquered the world and, even in defeat, shaped human civilization forever. The eagles fell, but their shadow still covers the earth. If you enjoyed this story, support the channel by subscribing.